And we're live. Hey everyone, welcome to FutureWork, a weekly live show brought to you in partnership with HR leaders and Hacking HR and our friends at Joveo, the world's AI-powered recruitment marketing platform. Each week, we'll be joined by some of the world's leading HR executives and experts to discuss the latest in HR, technology, and the future of work. I'm Chris Rainey, co-founder at HR Leaders and also co-founder at Atlas Copilot. I'm joined as always by my co-host Matt Burns, who's a former HR executive, global industry analyst, and co-founder at Atlas Copilot. Today we're going to be talking about many topics, but focusing specifically on how to realize change resilience in digital transformation. We've got some amazing panelists that will be joining us. We're joined by Jennifer Moore, who's a former CHRO and founder at Quantum HR Labs, and Rupert Brown, who's a people change advisory strategist, former HR executive at companies like Virgin Media O2, Maersk, and Gems Education, just to name a few. Welcome to the show, everyone. How are you both?
Doing well, thanks.
Thanks
Really
for
good.
joining
Good to
us.
see you.
We've got a truly global panel today, which is pretty cool, from all over the world. Matt, where do you want to kick things off, Matt? Because we've got a lot to talk about today. Where do you want to start?
Well, I think understanding for me, I'm always fascinated by transformation in general. And I love the idea of understanding how transformation is different today than it was even a year ago. So I'd love to hear from our panelists, like when you guys are looking at transformation today, how are you thinking about it differently than you were 12, 18, 24 months ago?
All right.
Where do you want to go, Matt?
You start, you jump in, Rupert. I mean,
Jump
just
in.
understanding kind of how you've seen the transformation and change from, 18
Yeah.
months ago at Matt set to where we are now.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, my most recent experiences have been with digital transformation, and also I've been researching a book on what I'm calling the knowing doing gap in bridging the leadership during change. And two things are evident, especially in digital transformation. One is that often the people involved in digital transformation are very technology software focused, and really are trying to get organizations away from legacy infrastructure into something that's a little bit more cutting edge. And often the rationale for doing that can be a technological one. And we often therefore overlook actually what is the experience of change for those who are trying to adapt to a million and one things going on in their sort of personal and private life in the organization, as well as what we then do with the technology. So I think it's essential that we don't overlook the experience of change, and don't believe that just because it is a newer, better technology that it's going to be, adopted any easier by people who are already overwhelmed by the current state of affairs. And what I found in the research is that essentially just having strong logic alone is not sufficient. And that's what sets up the condition for these disappointing transformations. But we also need to be relating with people at an emotional level, and with a relationship focus. So we actually take people on the journey.
I couldn't agree more. I think we've been on a continuum, right? I mean, we've been transforming and changing for what seems like, I mean, if you consider what was happening through COVID, even those kind of 3 years, and what continues to be the case. What Rupert is saying is very, really resonates with me. I think this is really about connecting the why, right? Getting back to, there's a lot happening in terms of the advent of technology. There's, it's evolving so quickly. A lot is coming at people. And I think that it really starts with and has to continue with the notion of like, why are we doing this? What is it connected to? It's not because we want to create a new company or be something new. It's because we want to amplify or enhance what we already know we are. And so I think with that, we need two things. One, we need to allow people to continue building on the primary skills they have, right? So the skills, the SME, the knowledge that people bring to the table that kind of catapults them into a career that they choose. And also mindset shifts, right? That are able, where people are able to connect to transformative experiences. So that could be around, what does it mean to be agile today in an organization? I mean, broadly speaking, what does it mean to be a human being in an organization today? So if you tie that to agility and adaptive processes and how you, as a human being, do that within an organization, collaboration, a learning mindset or a growth mindset, that's not necessarily innate to people, right? So being able to promote that through, personalized learning platforms or other things that organizations can do to bring that to the surface for people and the advent of new platforms and things that are coming on the market very quickly are allowing for us to personalize those experiences. And I think that's really what's changing and actually what's so exciting about today. And it's different from how it was even a couple of years ago or 18 months ago. So I think it's connecting the harder skills, but also mindset shifts. And I think that's been changing very quickly and will continue to change.
Well, I think you both hit on a really key point around co-creation. And I'm certainly seeing more evidence of organizations working with their colleagues to co-create the future that affects them all. And whether that's hybrid work strategies, technology procurement, program redesign, we're just seeing a lot more evidence of organizations reaching out to their colleague base, either through ERGs or through other methods, just to say, hey, what do you think? Let's be part of the solution together. There's been so much change in organizations in terms of the culture, how we work, where we work. We've really created that two-way dialogue that I ultimately think is going to benefit everybody.
Yeah. Rupert, someone in the chat asked a question around, and I'd love to see if you touched upon this in your research. What are some of the strategies or ways to keep employees and leaders motivated during these prolonged transitions? Because it's also like you kind of come out of one transformation straight into another. It's ongoing. It's like a never ending, right? Before we'd have one big transformation, maybe a few months or years of stability. Now we're just there's just almost like this fatigue just setting in.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, Matt touched on a nice point of co-creation, which comes out in my research as a smart strategy, not one that we should take for granted or assume that that's how most executives, proceed. And there's can be sometimes good reasons why co-creation is difficult, especially if the future is uncertain. If in fact that leaders are not clear themselves on the way forward and struggle to admit that reality and therefore bring people under the tent. So often, that desire to be the leader with the answer means that sometimes leaders do show up wanting to do change to others, and that really creates the conditions for these transformations that don't succeed. I think also what we often don't do is think about, from the perspective of those on these transformation journeys, what would it actually mean to support them and to phase some of that change. So if you think about timing, how often, in fact, do we think about timing, or do we just sort of sequence these roadmaps, these change initiatives based on what we can afford financially, and we just hit people with change at the next financial quarter because that's what's in the roadmap. The better leaders do ask the question, what is the receptiveness of the organization to absorb this change? Where are they currently with everything else that we threw at them last quarter? And there are questions, therefore, about what is the sort of the change resilience level, what is the threshold, and when is the right time to do the next big initiative. Because without doubt, the better organizations are the ones that are considering exactly how much can people absorb and take on board so that they can execute well. I mean, at the end of the day, this transformation is supposed to be happening sort of internal and behind the scenes, and we hope that all customers see is a better product service from us as an organization. But if we don't do that sort of questioning and that consideration up front, then we often end up overwhelming the very organization we're trying to help.
Agreed. I think also, this speaks to companies or leadership not making these decisions based on just consensus of a small group of people making decisions about these big efforts, and more about, well, what does the data say? So are we listening to the organization? Are we taking data points from, a diverse set of folks within the organization, of groups within the organization, and taking that data and making that a part of the process? So, I think that's key, and will continue to be as things evolve and go faster. It's interesting. I was reading about a couple of case studies, and Lego in particular, that had some real success in terms of their digital transformation. And they started off in what they termed to be quite a boring way. And that they really looked at, well, what do we need? How do we kind of create a foundation for what isn't a big initiative, but more like a continuum, right? And so they looked at their processes, they created efficiencies, they looked at the core operational processes and said, are we doing these well? What do we need to improve? They simplified supply chain. They reduced, I think, their vendors, external partners from 11,000 or something like that to 500. And then importantly, once they got that in order, they really took time to show their staff, right? What the benefits of digital, right, into improving not only their own creativity, but also creating products that delighted their end users, that delighted their customers. And that's what Lego's all about, right? Creativity, making kids happy, and just that's their ethos. And so by connecting it back to those values and showing their employees and creating this collaborative environment where there's like you're co-piloting with your staff, with your employees, they had wild success over that. I mean, it ultimately culminated in, I think, a Lego Minecraft collaboration, which essentially broke the internet. So it's a really important case study, and I think it speaks to these things don't have to be done in a unilateral way where it's just this big, massive one like initiative that it either fails or succeeds. It's a continuum, and there's, especially nowadays, there has to be a lot more interconnectedness between leadership and the organization at all levels.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the continuous piece is the key piece for me. It's the idea of building that change resilience into the organization such that you can implement small, medium, large changes and have a good sense that your employees will be able to adapt it, provide feedback, and that it doesn't just have a residual effect and eat away at, energy or resilience or engagement. That's where you get into trouble, right? It's when you have an organization where you've committed to several long-term initiatives. We've all been through ERP implementations or large digital restructurings or mergers and acquisitions where it almost feels like, in some cases, a forced march. And when you get to the end, this big kind of exhale. But the reality is we know that at the end of that, there's going to be another project. So I think that building resilience piece is absolutely key. And one thing that I've learned the hard way in leading a few of these is you really have to establish the measurements of success up front and be able to define when it's done. Because if you can't let people know when a particular project is concluded or when when we've achieved our outcomes, they can tend to drag on for long periods of time. And that ambiguity can be almost as disruptive as the change itself.
Yeah, it can be a bit demoralizing, right? Go on, Rupert. Go for it.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Matt. That definition of done came up with a client very recently. And actually, we sometimes think that the transformation teams might be in a better place because they're the ones that are sort of doing change or planning change programs for others. But similarly, for those guys, sometimes it never ends. And if the client enjoys what they're doing and they haven't got a very well-defined end stage, it just keeps rolling and rolling and rolling, which isn't great. And it's to say, what you do need for the resilience piece is to be able to have definitive start and end to these programs so that you can draw breath, you can sharpen the saw, you can actually get some rest and be ready for the next thing.
Someone asked in the chat, Rupert, when you spoke about the mind gap, the knowing doing gap, could you elaborate like on a detail a little bit of like what does that practically look like? Like we spoke about it, but what does it practically look like about making that change internally? What are the steps and practical steps that people listening should take? Who are the stakeholders that need to be involved? Like, how do you approach that from a practical point of view?
Yeah, so the conditions for the gap are when you think that strong logic and a plan is all you need to get you essentially to the finish line. And what you haven't got in place are the conditions to be able to actually empathize and take people with you on the journey. Some of the traps that people often fall into, believing that they are doing consultation, collaboration, is, for example, to always speak to what I call the usual suspects. It's the same half a dozen people you get in a room to take through confidential change to assess impacts, and you usually assess those or select those people on the basis that they don't flinch easily, happy to work all night, and actually they're not that representative of the organization. So I think it's important. I think that Lego example was a good one, where actually you need to be casting a much wider net when you try and bring what you might consider to be your first sort of line of people with you on the change program. So trying to get much more eye to eye, starting with the problem statement, and then actually getting people to come with you on the journey to come up with solutions that might work together. And I talk in the book about lots of different traps that leaders get themselves into, and one of the most common ones is also believing that you feel like you ought to have the answer. So the idea of coming out and sharing a problem or a feeling that is a negative one that reflects, you think, badly on you as the heroic leader is in many ways where you start that sort of sequence of events from. Whereas it's much better to say, look, we have a problem. Yeah, I think you guys could help us figure out a solution, and then work through it together, recognizing that it's uncertain, it's unclear, it's uncomfortable, and all those things. And the minute that you start sort of relating to people on a human level, we talk about psychological safety as a thing, a condition that is required, but it's not like a vitamin pill that you take in the morning, on the way to work. It's an outcome of doing a lot of these other relating aspects of leadership well, so that you can actually get the whole team behind you on the change journey.
You made me reflect to the pandemic where, we as HR leaders, we lost like 95% of our revenue overnight because we made most of our money for our in-person CHRO roundtables and events. And for like a couple of weeks, I was like, I have no plan. Like, I don't know what to do. And like all the team looking at me as the CEO and founder to come to them with a plan. And to your point, I ended up just calling a meeting with the team, and they thought it was for me to present the way ahead. And in fact, it was like, I don't know, but we're gonna do this together. We're gonna figure it out together. And at the time, I felt like, to your point, I felt like a bit of a failure. Like I'm supposed to have the answers, right? I'm supposed to be able to do that. And in fact, it actually was the opposite. Like people opened up more. They shared more ideas. We collaborated on taking HR leaders through its own digital transformation. And I didn't need to get their buy-in because they were fully bought in. They were part of the process. They felt empowered, almost unlocked a whole nother level of trust and buy-in. And it was uncomfortable, I'll be honest, to walk into the meeting and say, I don't know what we're gonna do. And from there we went on to succeed leaps and bounds. So I vividly remember that moment on the way to work, being like, I don't know how this is gonna go, but I'm about to turn up to the team and say, I actually don't know. I don't, but we're going to figure it out today together and make a plan.
It's funny how many of the people I interviewed had a COVID story where they essentially had to show up with full honesty, take that leader's mask away just for a moment. And one of the reasons why I think good leaders were able to relate well in that period was because they were able to just show up 100% human, and it felt like that we were in it together for a period of time, and in fact, engagement level and people just having an understanding of one another really went through the roof for some leaders during that period. But you have to wonder, so where are we now? We're back in the office, we're trying to drag people in 5 days a week, leaders trying to look like leaders, etc. Have we learned anything sustainably from that moment in COVID? Because I think actually a lot of leaders had a breakthrough moment, but if they don't take the time to reflect and practice that again, then it was just a once in a lifetime.
Right.
I feel like now what I'm trying to do when we're not in a state of crisis is just be intentional about making space for those conversations, and trying to bring that into the daily meetings we have, the interactions I have as well. Like it doesn't have to be a crisis for me to tap into that, right? And now, because we've set that precedent before, like the team are much more willing to challenge to speak up, to share their opinion, and it's been really refreshing. It's uncomfortable. Let's not pretend. Like I had one of my employees recently come to me. He just joined the business, and he was like, "I can't believe that that person in the meeting, Chris, said that you were wrong. Like you're the CEO of the company. How dare they disagree with your plan?" And I was like, "Oh, I realized culturally that's not normal in many organizations to say to the CEO about." And I was like, "Oh," I was like, no, that's great." And they're like, "Okay, but and they were from India, so very different cultural, right? As well." And I was like, I was I was pleasantly excited about that feedback. I was like, "This is great. That's a good thing. Like we should be in a position where I'm hiring you for your diversity of thought, your perspectives. I value that, and I want you to be able to be comfortable, even in the group environment, to disagree with the CEO of the company as well." So I was quite happy that we'd built that psychological safety, to your point earlier, for those conversations to flourish as well.
Well, and that diversity extends to an earlier point that Rupert made. When you're designing projects and designing pilots and designing rollouts, oftentimes people want to default to picking your A players, pick your best performing people, your highest performing colleagues, because they're the ones that are going to make it work no matter what, which in a lot of ways is a false positive. So I learned with leadership before that oftentimes when you're building out a pilot, you want to include some people that may be dissenters or may be struggling in role, or they may have operational challenges, because that is going to give you a much clearer representation of the reality in your organization than simply just cherry picking the ones that are best suited for the change. And having done that a few times where you get that all-star team together, the pilot goes swimmingly, and then the overall rollout falls flat in its face, I was like, okay, we got to change this. We got to bring in more dissenting voices. We got to bring in more challenges so we can fix those during the pilot when they're meant to be surfaced and fixed, and not save them for the big reveal.
Yeah. It's a perfect connection to what we were just talking about with psychological safety, right? And bringing your ideas or dissent to the table, right? And feeling comfortable to do that. I totally agree. Whether you randomize it or whether you just open it up to everybody in an organization, right, to take part, or have managers talk to their teams and create more interest in being a dissenter in terms of those, moments of experimentation is so important. It was a challenge that I've faced even recently in my former position, where you just had a certain group of people, that would, as you said, would kind of drive initiatives, and you were only getting, one very small piece of the pie, so to speak, in terms of data, in terms of the information that's really going to enrich where you take this and whether it will ultimately succeed or not. So I think it ties very closely with what we were just talking about in terms of setting the stage and promoting differing views, right? And experiences.
It's funny though, because I'm in the middle of a project right now which has a co-creation element, and I can feel myself almost looking for the path of least resistance. It's like, how can I select a dozen people so I can claim co-creation but not get taken off track or delayed? And it brings me to an experience of driving transformation in a previous organization where I called it goal blindness, where I had committed to deliver on a project, and I told myself my next job depended on the successful completion of the project. So all of a sudden, I was tuning out those voices that were trying to tell me something was wrong. And almost like the closer you get to what you think is the end date, the less open you are to those dissenting voices, which leads you to think you should really front load this. You should start with getting those voices, those dissenting voices, those unusual voices in the room early on, so that you are creating a better designed product, rather than blanking those voices out as you get closer to the end date. So I think it's a really interesting point, and it just comes down to human tendencies to want to try, and you overpromise, you want to deliver, and you're nervous of change resistance.
Well, and it also speaks to, though, well, first of all, one thing that I tried to apply not so successfully, but I think it's still something that it really interests me, is this whole notion of a pre-mortem, right? So we do post-mortems after initiatives, right? And we go back, and hindsight is always clear, right? 2020. But in a pre-mortem stage, it's just this, where you're actually seeking out every little facet, anything that could possibly go wrong, and looking for that dissension, as you said, Rupert. So I love the notion of that, and really seeking that out and doing it in a really clear, direct way, right? So people feel, oh, my not agreeing with this is actually valuable to this organization. So not only do I feel psychologically safe to do it, I'm really excited to do it. And then in that, I think it raises this whole collaboration, right? Where you have people who are really passionate about it, and people who just aren't bought in yet, or who are dissenters, and they're actually working together to create a better, more safeguarded solution. So this whole notion of pre-mortem, I think it has legs to it, especially as things are moving so quickly. But that also means that the organization itself has to be courageous enough to promote a feeling of, well, fast failing is okay. Like, well, let's fail fast, let's learn fast, and let's do it together without blame. And that takes a lot of courage to do that, especially when you're watching your bottom line. But I feel personally that's really the only way to do it. Otherwise, you're flying in the dark, really. So I love it.
I love a while back I was speaking to Novartis's CHRO and chief learning officer, and they talk about creating a culture of curiosity at Novartis, and part of that is during their awards or celebrations they celebrate the biggest failures. but for a positive lens, like the almost success. And they put just as much emphasis on saying, hey, we know this didn't work out as we planned, but congratulations. Right on that. And they're in a space where it couldn't be more high stakes. You're talking about life and death, right? They're as well. So if they can do it in that environment, we can do it in other environments as well. And it really stood out to me, the emphasis that they put as part of their purpose statements and why and values of culture of curiosity was right there at the top as well. And I thought that was super important. It's something that I tried to bring back to HR leaders, to say, just because someone failed, or, failure for me is a positive word. And many of us have a negative connotation to that word, but if you're not failing, you're not learning, you're not innovating, you're not pushing forward, right? And so it's a big, coming back to mindset, that's a big shift in people's minds, because many of us have worked in companies where you're not rewarded for that, right? So you kind of, like, to Rupert's point, I'm going to do everything I can to avoid any of these things that could potentially block me or slow down my progress because I want to achieve X. But what is the cost? Because those detractors, if you think it's hard bringing them on board early, it's much harder later on when you've already gone through the whole process. You try and present that to those people, then it's even way more difficult. So you may as well have those conversations early on, make them part of the process, as opposed to fighting an uphill battle after you've done your entire plan, as it were, and you want to roll that out. You're kind of just delaying the pain.
Absolutely.
At that point. Yeah. I want to talk about something that someone brought up on a podcast recently. A CHRO was telling me, Chris, like, they were saying, I'm not going to mention their names because they probably wouldn't want me to. They're saying, Chris, myself and the team, we're just exhausted. There's this constant, we've been a barrage of things that have been thrown at me and my HR team. We're burnt out, we're exhausted, and it's just one thing after another as well. And to the point of change resilience, one of the things that I was like, what are you doing about it? Was one of my questions. And one of the things she said was really interesting is recognizing when you're in those sprints and talking about it. Say, like, we're going to be in this sprint of, and it's going to be tough for X amount of time, and just having a conversation with your team about what that means, and addressing the elephant in the room that this is going to be difficult. So, because I was asking, like, how are you dealing with that, with also being a wife of 3 kids, and or a husband, etc., and balancing with things like, well, Chris, I know when I'm in my sprint, so I know that, and I build guardrails and around that, and I build systems to help support me. So I think there's something to be said about knowing when you're in the deep end and understanding and having a conversation around it. But I was wondering if you've ever both felt that with your own teams and also personally.
Oh, for sure. And I've been speaking about this quite a lot actually. The CHRO role post-COVID really expanded to take on a lot of sort of social causes,
Yeah.
unwinnable battles
Mhm.
that in many cases we felt compelled to do as the representative of the people, but it also just led to us getting distracted and off, if you like, almost off strategy um, uh, and I think the cost of that has been essentially, the stretch and the burnout of the people who were well intended to actually
Mhm.
make a difference to the people. So I think it does come back down to a sort of self-care type of action. And in some ways, it comes down to quite a few things. There is a book that I stumbled across that I thought was really interesting. It was Tom Fletcher's 10 Things to Do to Prepare for an Uncertain Future. And a lot of the things it talks about is learning how to look after ourselves, but also learning how to look after each other from a community and a network point of view. And I think that is super important, because if we don't have people there that can actually help and support us, then if we just rely on our to-do list, in the HR world, the job is never done. So you could easily burn out even when you're not in a sprint. I mean, that's the strange thing about the role now. It's become so broad, and if you're well intended, your risk of burning out is pretty high.
I think too, and this speaks to kind of the evolving skill set and mindset, frankly, as we talk about both, whether you're an HR leader or any kind of leader or any employee, really, if we're keeping it specific to work. And that is around, are we as efficient as we can be, right? And are we giving our employees the tools to be efficient? So we think about evolving skills, right? In this new digital economy, or whatever you want to call it, or with the advent of AI and all of the enhancements, right, to productivity. I think it's important for people to, one, be given those tools and to learn how to use them for their own benefit, right? To free them up, right? For a better focus on wellness, or just having more time to get stuff done. Because I think, especially in HR, the repetitive tasks, right? Things that you're doing over and over again are exhausting in their own right. Plus you're dealing with the kind of the human quotient and all of that, right? The emotional kind of context that comes into play. But I really do think there's something here that's, that has to do with, ensuring that whether it's our tech stack, whether it's just our processes, whether it's how seriously we're taking the function, right? In terms of listening, right? Are we using data? Are we optimized, right? To allow our people to be optimized. And I think that's where, at least in my own experience, people have really gotten bogged down, because they are having to deal with these repetitive tasks and also having to deal with these things that are coming out of the blue, whether it's market situations or things that are happening within the organization or with certain groups of people. It's a lot to juggle. So it's about giving those tools for efficiency to free up time where it's possible. And then to create a continuum of learning, right? And teaching people how to be more agile and more adaptive. So I think there's going to be a lot. I think a lot of good will come of that, as long as organizations allow for people to learn and to adapt and invest really in a lot of this stuff. HR in particular, a lot of the back-end systems are pretty antiquated. So I think it's gonna create a need for leadership to really invest in that function and see it as a real strategic partner.
Matt, you've gone through that many times. Yes.
Once or 10 times. I think I love the earlier comment around there's some things that are controllable within our world, especially in the HR space. There's some things that are not controllable. wherever we can, let's identify the things that we can influence, and let's just try and avoid unforced errors. And sometimes we're our own worst enemies. We put ourselves under pressure to get deadlines done by arbitrary dates that don't really align to the business strategy. We're trying to impress somebody in a board meeting. Like let's try and avoid creating chaos internally where we don't have to, because there are lots of opportunities for the external world to create chaos for us. Let's let the world do its thing and try and keep our world as disciplined as possible. And having a dialogue with the team, I always tried to work to say, guys, if there's things that don't make sense, let's raise them and learn from them so we can reduce our internal stressors that are avoidable and focus on keeping that resilience for things that we may need to be ready for that we don't have within our control.
Yeah. It's important.
And it's about being agile. And that really is it, what you've just articulated. It's about the constant flex of that, right? Allowing for things to shift, to change. And I think that in of itself helps to alleviate pressure for people. But when you do that and keep, people constantly connected to the why, and I mean, so communication is really key, and doing that in a really meaningful way is essential. I think without that agility, people are just, you're force feeding, and it's, I think people reach that level of exhaustion a lot more quickly than if you approach it with a more flexible mindset.
Yeah. That's why I love your example you said earlier about Lego. Right, they kind of like so many companies and leaders are so quick to try and add more on top where it's a new technology, but taking a step back to just assess and almost remove a lot of that, right, and simplify the process, become more agile, and now that kind of frees you up to then look at the art of the possible as well. And then something we talk about internally is like, are we doing the basics to a high standard consistently? Kind of just start like there. Like we say that all the time. Anyone who works in a company is probably tired of hearing me say, are we doing the basics to our standard consistently before we think about adding any new technology or fancy new strategies or focus? Like, because if we're not doing that right, then we're not going to be servicing our customers. We're not going to be getting customer delight. We're not going to be having engaged employees, all of that stuff.
Well, it's interesting. As you talk about that, you may know about also the case study of Starbucks, right? Where Starbucks, created the app, right? Because their competitors were doing it and they could do that really easily. So they did. And I think right off the bat, maybe 31% of their, of orders were done through the app, right? However, in a week's time, they lost 1 million loyal customers, because what happened was, if you think about Starbucks and what the whole ethos there is, creating community and connection. You go into your coffee, your coffee locations, and you sit for a long period of time, you meet with people, etc. Howard Schultz at the time had publicly castigated his leadership team to say, let's just stop this whole digital transformation for a moment and just get back to brass tacks. I mean, who are we? What is the soul of this organization, and how do we get it back? So I think it speaks to what you just said is, who are we as an organization? What do we stand for? And let's just take a little bit of a slower, more, strategic and also authentic approach to who we are. So as opposed to the technology being or digital or whatever you want to say, being the answer to everything that we want to do as a company, let's just carry on doing the things that we know we need to do and we want to do. And eventually digital will follow. That's oversimplified, but that is literally how he kind of couched it. And I think it's a really interesting case juxtaposed against Lego. If you think about just the two different approaches, which had very interesting effects on bottom line for both.
Yeah, because there's an unintended consequence of technology that you're removing the human experience and interaction, like you talk about the Starbucks. Because, I remember when I was working in London Bridge, I knew the barista personally. I was there every day, right? And when I joined in, they greeted me with a smile. I said hi. They already knew my name, so they wrote it on the cup, right? Like, and that was part of why I went there, because of that connection and that human experience, the customer experience. So you remove that with an app where I walk in, I've already ordered, I pick up my Starbucks cup and I leave. You just removed all of that away from it, right? to your point. Even to this day, my wife always says, "Oh, we can get the points on the app. Let's do the app." I'm like, "No, I'm going in," and I'll get out the car and I'll go in and I'll wait in line. And it sounds counterintuitive for time, but like you're right, it's the experience of like going in there, seeing the person, as well. So we've got to be careful about where we go too far with
Right.
technology. I'm realizing we're already 10 minutes over time. That went.
Oh God.
That was your job, wasn't it?
I know that was my job. I know. I did say that the time will go really
Yes.
fast, and it did. Like we kind of just got into it. But and for everyone listening, sorry we even get to look at the chat too much. We were just so engrossed in the conversation as well. But thank you. I appreciate both taking the time out to join us. Happy Thanksgiving again for everyone that's listening
Thank
all over
you.
the world as well. And wherever you are, appreciate you. Have a good weekend. If you're new to the show, wherever you're watching, whether it's on Hacking HR's page or whether it's HR Leaders or Joveo, make sure you hit the bell icon on the LinkedIn page on the top right-hand side. That'll make sure you get a notification next time we're live. Also, connect with our panelists, connect with Jen, connect with Rupert on LinkedIn. We'll leave links to their LinkedIn profiles in the chat so you can connect and follow up if you want to learn more about their work and collaborate with them. Also, there's another link in the description where you'll be able to download our new latest sort of the 10 best recruitment trends to attract, source, and engage and hire talent in 2024. I should change that to 2025 now. We're already there. Already, the year went really fast. Make sure you download a copy of that now. Loads of best practices and case studies there. And yeah, apart from that, we'll see all of you on December 3rd and the 4th for the AI HR Summit. So we're really excited about that. It's hard to believe we can already see there's over 10,000 CHROs of you that have already signed up. So we're looking forward to that. We've got 2 incredible days and 90 chief people officers who are sharing case studies around how they're implementing AI into their organizations, and not just the surface level, but also the failures, the highs, the lows. That's where we really learn the most. So make sure you tune in for that. It's free. You can head over to AIHRsummit.com to claim your free spot. Apart from that, enjoy the rest of your weekend, everyone, and enjoy the weekend, and we'll see you next week. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks.